Welcome in, everyone, to our Cracked Racquets French Open Women's Singles Draw preview. All of us so excited for the action in Paris to get underway. And of course, when they released these draws on Thursday, we all wanted to know, where would our favorite players land? Who would have the toughest pathway to a Grand Slam title? We have those answers, and joining me to discuss them, as well as how we think the action in Paris is going to unfold, is of course our Cracked Racquets Do Everything, a former Denison men's tennis great, the only undefeated high school tennis coach in Missouri tennis history, James Foster McDonald. Jamie, this women's draw is stacked.
It is very stacked, and as you and I will get into, not stacked evenly at all. There are some sections of this draw where people have just got to be throwing up their hands and saying, what just happened, right? And other people are like, okay, I'm pretty happy here. So very unbalanced here, and I'm sure we'll get into that.
No, off the top, if I'm Alina Svitolina, I'm like, were you upset that I hit all those tennis balls at Gael Monfils? Was that my fault? Am I being punished for that video? Because, yeah, that quarter of the draw is incredible, and we will get into that, as you mentioned, what we want to do here on these draw preview shows to help all of you fans get ready for all of the action. We're going to answer 4 questions. We're going to talk about the top seeds that are on upset alert. We're going to talk about the unseeded players that we think could make a run to the second week or maybe even further. We will name our favorite first round matches, and then of course, as we do on every preview show, we're going to give some predictions talking about who we think is going to emerge over these next 2 weeks and ultimately take home the title in Paris. But let's start with the top seeds. We already alluded to it. The quarter for Alina Svitolina about as difficult as it gets, but you look on that top half of the draw in general, Jamie, who are the seeds you have and upset alert?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think Jo Konta is the number one that I circle, just because I was very confident in her going to the U.S. Open, and that just ended up in a disappointment. So I think for the French, I got to go to the opposite, right? I got to just put her on upset alert regardless. So she's one in my list. Putintseva is also there. She's got a pretty tough ride if she wants to make a deep run in this one. The one I put a question mark, honestly, though, is Mertens, and that's not because of her level. Her level has been solid. We've talked about her for weeks now as tennis has come back, but she's got a bit of a tough draw as well. So, she might be a little unhappy with the draw gods, but regardless, those 3 are some of the names I circled.
I mean, listen to these seeds in the Svitolina section. You have Svitolina, you have Kontaveit, you have Mertens, you have Alexandrova. That's the top half of the draw. You also have Azarenka, finalist at the U.S. Open, Serena Williams, Serena freaking Williams, Putintseva, quarterfinalist at the U.S. Open, and then Barbara Strycova, who of course is a dangerous loomer as well. That section is stacked. They're all on upset alert for me, and I mean, for Anett Kontaveit, she's got a first-round match against Caroline Garcia, who's been playing awfully well of late. That's a really tricky one. I agree with you. That section's just wide freaking open. The one player who hasn't had success who's in that portion of the draw is like Alina Svitolina. That's your least successful of late seed in that section. That's ridiculous. So yeah, that top, that bottom section of the top half absolutely loaded. To your point, Konta Goff, that's a blockbuster round 1 match. Certainly, if you're Jo Konta, that's a match you expect to win. I think you look at some of the other names in this top half. I don't count out Zavatska against Bertens. Bertens hasn't played much. Zavatska has played a lot of late. She's been playing really well also. It's a match Bertens should win, but still, to your point, Kuznetsova, Pavlyuchenkova, that's a really fun one. Swiatek versus last year's finalist Vondrousova. That should be great. Cici Bellis versus Bernarda Pera. Here at Cracked Racquets, we are going to be locked in on that. But it's a wide open section of the top half, as it always seems to be in these WTA Grand Slam events. Who are the seeds you have on upset alert, Jamie, on the bottom half?
Yeah, the bottom half also gets a bit wacky, but I feel like there's no section of this draw where you can't say it. I think unequivocally, the section that we just went through, the bottom half at the top, is the most loaded and ridiculous, but there's plenty of room for things to go south on the bottom half. So for me, I think Madison Keys is the first one I circled. She's got a really tough road in the first 2 rounds in particular. Sabalenka is another one I would say. Risk, not a high seed, but still in a bit of danger. And for me, Pliskova. I know Pliskova is somebody who you have going deep into this draw, but for me, especially in those first couple rounds, maybe even into round 3, she's gonna have to face some tough tests. So I'm definitely not counting her into the second week automatically.
Yeah, I think another name you could mention, Ons Jabour's got a tough one versus Diaz. Kerber's got a tough one, her first match. Yvonne Magdalenet's going to play the talented young Canadian, former junior French Open champion, Leylah Fernandez, who we've seen take so many top 100 player scalps over these past couple of months, her first few months on tour. I agree with you that Svitolina quarter's the most brutal, but there's plenty of potential for upset, especially as you get into that second, third round. In Ostapenko-Pliskova second round match, that's must-see TV. Yep. That's going to be, it's funny that Ostapenko's the one with the Grand Slam between the two of them, but just speaks to how much talent they both have. I think for Ali Risk, it's a really tricky first round matchup against Julia Gergis. That's going to be a fun one to monitor as well, both of them top 40 players. But yeah, in terms of the upsets, I think especially once we hit the second week, again, is it really an upset when a seed takes out another seed, especially given the parity we see from 1 to, or maybe 4 to 50 right now in the women's game? Maybe not, but it should be a really fun round of action, and we've mentioned some of the seeds on Upset Alert, but the flip side, who will be the unseeded players, Jamie, who might take them out in this event, might make a nice run for themselves into the second week of a major?
Yeah, I'll start on the bottom half just because that's sort of where we were. For me, I think there's a few. You mentioned her already, Ostapenko. I think if she gets through that second round matchup against Pliskova, which is no easy task, that section of the draw is really open for her. She's got the confidence. She's won this thing before. So you can't take that lightly, especially in a draw like this. I think that's going to give her a ton of confidence. So I would see her moving through. Now, again, if she gets through Pliskova, that's a big, big if, so I'm not really sure on that one, but if I had to circle a name, it's Ostapenko. I think Cornet could make a sneaky run into this one, especially on clay. She's going to make everyone's life so difficult, whoever else is going to play against her, right? Nobody's going to be able to easily hit her through the court against her. Nobody's going to be able to hit through her. It's not anything that someone can just go out there and do without huge weapons. And if the huge weapons are firing consistently, then yeah, Cornet might go out of a match 2 and 3 and just be done with it. But if there's any sort of hitch in that opponent's game, she's really dangerous, and I could see her making a second week.
Yeah, I agree with both of those names. The other ones I'd throw out there, Leylah Fernandez, we've seen how dangerous she can be. Kvitova would be her third round match if she can get through Lynette, and that wouldn't be easy either. But also in that section, Polona Herzog, who's very, very tricky out on clay, will play slice, will just mix it, slice and dice and throw different looks at you. She is dangerous. And then I'm going to throw one more name, Fiona Ferro, who won that title in Palermo. The young French woman looked really, all court game, can turn defense to offense, slides into her shot, really looks good on the clay. She hasn't played much of late, but if she can get through her section of the draw, I think she's got a tricky seed. And her second match would be against Elena Rybakina, who obviously has had so much success in 2020. But if she gets through that, now it's a potential Mukova in round 3. And I think Ferro's on the level. You beat a Rybakina, you beat a Mukova, you're on that. I think those are all similar in level players. I think she could absolutely find herself in the second week, and I don't think it should shock anyone. In terms of the top half, I don't know if it will be either Svitolina or Serena getting through that portion of the draw, but I think it'll be one of the seeded players that knocks them out. But on that top half of the draw, do you see any unseeded players with potential to make a deep run?
It's tough. It's definitely tough. That draw's on lockdown. I'd say if I had to pick any that we're going to get through, I'd say maybe a Świątek could get through, maybe a Pavlyuchenkova if they get through their first rounds, because both are first rounds that we've circled. If they get through those, then maybe they're dangerous. But yeah, for me, the top half is pretty locked down with Halep all the way at the top, and then her taking on either Vika Serena or Svitolina, whoever happens to come out of there.
Yeah, I just think Halep is playing so well right now. It's going to be tough for anyone to beat her. But that section with Yastremska, Vondrousova, Świątek, Suez, and then Jeannie Bouchard, who's playing really well right now, that's a fascinating section of the draw in the top half. I agree with you. I think Pavlyuchenkova is a good name to circle. But other than that, I think it is going to be a lot of seeds battling one another as we progress through this Grand Slam. And I think that's going to be really fun. Of course, before we get there, we have so many fun first round matches to break down. Jamie, give me your favorites on the top half.
Yeah, on the top half, a couple names we just mentioned. I think Kuznetsova and Pavlyuchikova. That's going to be a really interesting first match, not only just for the level of play itself, but also for what it means for the rest of that section. Now, maybe it's a moot point because those big names in the top half are going to come in and clobber them anyway. But I think it's really interesting to see what could happen throughout the rest of the tournament based on that one match. And then I think for the story, I think you have to throw in a Konta Gauff as well. I know we mentioned that earlier on. Konta, somebody who I'm looking out for at this point because I've lost some confidence in her game. Obviously, the big stage is something that Coco Gauff loves and is not afraid of. So I think that's going to be a really, really interesting one to look at too.
I completely agree with you. The only ones I would add in there, Kontaveit Garcia, that has the chance to be a really high-level match. And then, Vondrousova Swiatek, which, much like Kuznetsova Pavlyuchenkova, could be one of those inflection point matches in the draw. But let's move now to the bottom half. A ton of fun action. Which are the ones you're watching most closely?
Yeah, for me, I'm circling Madison Keys. I know I mentioned her earlier as potentially being on upset alert, and that doesn't just go into the second and third round. That starts right away. She's playing a very tricky match in Sang in the first round, and I think she's going to have a tall task even getting through that first round. I mean, Madison Keys, obviously we've seen her not be her most comfortable on the clay, so she's in a bit of a dangerous spot here. The other one I would say right off the bat is Pegula and Sabalenka. Pegula, obviously, listeners, anybody who's watching this, that Gruskin and I have been talking about her game for weeks now, and so I've got a lot of confidence in her. Sabalenka, on the other hand, I don't have as much confidence at the moment. So, look, I think that's going to be a really, really high-level match, and Pegula could pull off that upset.
Yeah, I agree with you. Some others on upset alert I mentioned already. Kerber versus Yvonne. That's a nice Grand Slam champion versus young up-and-comer matchup. Risk versus Gergis. I want to see how Petra Martic looks. I think it's a tough opponent for her. And Masaki Doi. Magda Linette versus Leylah Fernandez. A ton of fun matches, so it really starts on day one. All of you listeners, all of you viewers should be locked in, hopefully with us, as we see all of this action unfold. And with that in mind, my final question for you, Jamie. Semifinals, finals. Give me your predictions for how we're going to see this all play out.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think coming out of the top, we mentioned it earlier, but you got to go with Halep. She's just looked too good. I think she's going to come out of her quarter looking just fine. In the semis, it's a bit of a toss-up who she's going to be facing out of that gauntlet of a quarter. If I had to pick one right now, give me Vika, just because she's looked so good. And look, it hasn't let me down yet. The only letdown was just picking her in the finals over Osaka. So I can take that one. Doesn't hurt me too much. So let's say Vika and Simona up top. Then down below, I'm not really sure. I think Pliskova, I don't think she's going to go all the way through here. So I have her not getting knocked out. The bottom half then gets really, really opened. So for me, I think the winner of Muguruza and Brady is going to end up winning this one. So I think that's going to come out of the bottom half. Ultimately, though, I'm still going to take whoever comes out of the top half over the bottom regardless. So whether it's Halep or Vika, I think they're going to win a title.
That is a cop-out. That was not a pick. Give me a pick.
How's that not a pick?
You said Vika or Halep. Give me one name.
To win the whole thing? Okay, I'll go Halep.
It Vika or... You're going Halep?
Yeah, I'll go Halep to win the title.
All right, I like it. I just wanted to get you on the record. Yeah, look, I agree with everything you said about the top half. If you've watched Vika as ranked these past 5 weeks, she doesn't miss. And when she does, she doesn't do it again for another 4 points. So as good as everyone in that section is, she's the player playing best. She's the pick for me. But the player playing the best in the tournament, the player playing the best in women's tennis on clay right now, Simona Halep, who's won, 14 matches in a row, 3 straight events, 2 of them on clay. She's my pick to advance to the final in the top half. I think she's going to take on Garbine Muguruza, who I've been so impressed with, who was a finalist at this year's Australian Open, was injured heading into New York, but seems to have found her form, found her health, former French Open champion. She's got the size, the wingspan, and the power to just do it all on clay. I like her to knock out Karolina Pliskova in the semis. I think that's going to be a really good match, but give me Halep over Muguruza in the final. No matter what, though, I know this is going to be some fun action, Jamie, so I will ask your final thoughts on this event.
Yeah, the only one, a bit of a bummer. I wanted to see how Osaka would go from the U.S. Open to the French. Obviously, we're not going to get to see that happen, but regardless, potentially opens it up. And, really the storyline now for me is Simona Halep. Can she capitalize on this momentum that we've seen, as you mentioned, her pickup on the clay? If she can do that, look, props to her. And I'm really excited to see her continue that winning streak and hopefully get all the way through and get a title.
Absolutely. New fans can follow along with all of the action here at Cracked Racquets. It's going to be recaps every day on the mini break. We're going to be making our predictions day in, day out on the Great Shot podcast. And of course, you can find all of our content by going to our website, crackedrackets.com. But with that in mind, for my wonderful co-host, Jamie McDonald, and all of us here at Cracked Racquets, I'm your host, Alex Gruskin. You've been watching the Cracked Racquets 2020 French Open Women's Singles Preview. We hope you enjoy all of these matches, folks. Thanks for watching.